Picture this. You're a farmer, and a natural disaster hits your farm. Flood, drought, you name it. You're looking at some serious losses, and you need to apply for aid from the USDA. But then, remember all the paperwork, and the stress just piles on.
Oh, yeah. And you know that stress isn't just on the farmer's end. The government also wants to make sure that aid is distributed fairly quickly, but also accurately and legally.
Absolutely, and that's what we're diving into today. We've got this USDA memo outlining changes to the Emergency Conservation Program, you might know it as ECP. It's all about getting farmers the help they need when disaster strikes.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that a 2024 audit found some hiccups in the ECP's payment process. It wasn't totally aligned with something called the Payment Integrity Information Act of 2019.
Okay, so now before we get too deep in the weeds, what exactly is this Payment Integrity Information Act?
Think of it like this. It's a law designed to make sure that the government doesn't make improper payments. It basically makes sure that aid programs like the ECP have systems in place to catch errors and keep things above board. In this case, the audit found that the ECP needed to tighten things up a bit.
Gotcha. So to address this, they're rolling out a new system.
Exactly. They're introducing something called the CCC-770 ECP Checklist. And get this, it's going to be used at every stage of the application process, from the moment a farmer applies to when they actually receive the aid.
Sounds like a pretty big change. So what's the logic behind all of this?
Well, by carefully reviewing each step of the process, the USDA hopes to reduce errors and make sure that they're in line with that. Payment Integrity Act we talked about. It's about making the process more efficient and accurate for both the farmers and the government.
And I'm guessing this isn't just for a handful of applications, right?
We're talking about all ECP applications, revisions, any payments, everything. It's a pretty big overhaul.
Okay, so big changes are coming to the ECP. Now let's get into the specifics. This new checklist system, what does it actually look like for the farmer on the ground? What are the most important things for them to know?
So one important thing to know is that the USDA understands. Things happen. Let's say a farmer already started their application using an older checklist. They don't have to redo everything. As long as that old checklist was filled out correctly, they're good to go. No need to start from scratch.
Okay, that's a relief. So the USDA is trying to make this transition as smooth as possible. But I'm curious, if we dive a little deeper into these checklists, how many are we actually talking about? Is there just one checklist, or are there different types?
Well, it's a bit more complicated than just one checklist. You see, there are actually 7 different versions of the CCC-770.
7 different versions. Wow, that sounds like a lot. Why so many?
It all comes down to which software system the application is in. There are 2 main systems, the cost share software, or CSS, and then there's the dedicated ECP software. Depending on which system is being used, there's a specific checklist version that goes along with it.
Okay, so it's tailored to the specific software. That makes sense. But I can see how that could be a bit confusing. For someone just trying to navigate the system, can you walk us through a scenario? Let's say a farmer submits an application. What happens next? Which checklist comes into play?
Sure. So let's say a farmer submits their application. The first thing that happens is that a county office employee will initiate the appropriate CCC-770 checklist based on which software system they're using. They'll work with the farmer to make sure all the necessary information is provided and that everything meets the program requirements.
So right from the start, the checklist comes into play. It's not just something that gets tacked on at the end.
Exactly. It's integrated into the entire process.
So let's say the application is reviewed and approved. What happens then? Does the checklist still have a role to play?
Absolutely. Before any money can actually be paid out, the county executive director, sometimes called the CED, has to look everything over, not just the application itself, but the completed checklist too. They're making sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. Things like maps, eligibility, documents, technical plans, even receipts. It all needs to be in order.
It's like a final check to ensure everything is accurate and legitimate.
Exactly. It's about ensuring that the aid is going to the right place and being used for its intended purpose.
Okay, so we've got the county office staff working with the farmer to complete the checklist. Then the CED doing a final review before any money is paid out. Sounds pretty thorough. But is that the end of the line for the checklist?
Well, there's actually another layer of review that happens in some cases. The district director, or DD, might also review the application and checklist, especially for applications submitted early in a new disaster period.
Ah, so it's like a second set of eyes, just to make extra sure everything's accurate. I like that. So it's not just the county level, even the state office is keeping an eye on things. What are they looking for?
Their review is very similar to the CED's. They're also looking at all those forms, maps, eligibility documents, the whole 9 yards. It's all about making sure nothing slipped through the cracks and that the CED's review was thorough.
So a double-check system to guarantee everything is on the up and up. Sounds like a lot of oversight.
It is, but it's important to remember that. This program is dealing with taxpayer dollars. Those dollars need to be used responsibly. And this level of scrutiny ensures fairness, accuracy, and accountability.
Which ultimately benefits the farmers, right?
Exactly. A more efficient program means farmers get the help they need faster and with less hassle.
So it's not just about making things harder for farmers. It's about making the entire system work better for everyone involved.
That's the goal. And it also protects the integrity of the program itself, making sure it's sustainable for future disasters.
Okay, so we've walked through the checklist process, from the initial application all the way to the state office review. It's clear that the USDA is serious about these changes and about making the ECP work as effectively as possible.
Absolutely. It's about ensuring that when disaster strikes, farmers have a reliable and efficient system to turn to for support.
It's a lot to digest, but I think we've got a good handle on the basics of this new checklist system. Now, earlier I mentioned that this whole thing reminded me of something else.
You did. I'm still waiting to hear what that is.
Well, it got me thinking. This checklist idea, with its multiple layers of review and all that documentation, could it work for other government programs? Not just disaster relief, but things like healthcare education infrastructure.
Now, that's a fascinating question, and one we should definitely explore further.
But first, let's break down those checklists and really see what the CED and DD are looking for during their reviews. What are they scrutinizing?
Let's get into the details of those checklists. It gets pretty interesting.
All right, so we got these checklists, and we know they're important. But what are the CEDs and DDs actually looking at when they do their reviews?
Well, let's start with the CED, the County Executive Director. They're really digging into the details, making sure everything lines up with the program rules. They're checking the application forms themselves, making sure they're filled out completely and correctly.
So it's not just a quick glance. They're really going through those applications with a fine-tooth comb.
Exactly. And they don't stop there. They're also looking at the maps, making sure they match up with what the farmer is claiming on their application. You wouldn't want someone claiming aid for land that wasn't actually affected by the disaster. Right.
That makes sense. So they're verifying the location and the extent of the damage. What else are they checking?
Well, there's the whole issue of eligibility. The ECP has pretty specific rules about who qualifies for assistance, so the CED is making sure the farmer meets all those requirements.
So it's not just about the disaster itself, but also about the farmer's specific circumstances.
Right. And then there are the plans for how the farmer is going to address the damage. If they're restoring land or rebuilding structures, there might be engineering plans or technical documents that need to be reviewed. The CED is making sure those plans are sound and will actually fix the problem.
So they're checking the practicality of the proposed work, making sure it's going to be effective. What about the financial side of things?
That's a big part of it, too. The CED is going through receipt logs, any kind of financial documentation the farmer submitted. To prove what they spent, they're making sure those dollars were used appropriately and for eligible expenses.
It's all about accountability. So
Yeah.
we've got the forms, the maps, the eligibility, the plans, the finances. That's a lot to check.
It is. And before they sign off, the CED also reviews that CCC-770 checklist itself, making sure it was properly filled out by the county office staff. It's like a checklist of the checklist.
Wow, that's attention to detail. So the CED is playing a critical role in making sure this whole process is running smoothly and accurately. And what about the DED, the district director? When do they get involved, and what are they focusing on?
The DDD's review is an extra layer of oversight. They'll review a certain number of applications before they're approved, and a certain number of agreements before those first payments go out. It's about catching any potential issues early on and making sure everyone is on the same page.
So not every application goes through the DD, but they're keeping a close eye on things, especially at the beginning of a new disaster period.
Exactly. And their review is very similar to the CED's. They're looking at all the same things: the forms, the maps, the eligibility, documents, the plans, the receipts, the whole shebang. They're making sure nothing slipped through the cracks.
So it's a double-check system, which makes sense when we're talking about something as important as disaster relief.
Yeah.
And both the CED and the DAD have to document the reviews, right?
Absolutely. They have to note any errors they found and what needs to be corrected, right there on the CCC-770 checklist. It's not just a passive review. They're actively involved in making sure things are done right.
And if they find serious issues, they can send it back for more work.
That's right. They have the authority to say, hold on, something's not right here. We need to take another look.
Okay, so we've got the county office staff initiating the checklist, the CED reviewing it before approval, and the DED doing a separate review for a portion of applications and agreements. It's a multi-layered system.
It is. But remember, there's one more layer of review. The state office.
Right. They come in after payments have already been made. What's their role in all of this?
Think of them as the quality control team. Each year, they randomly select a percentage of paid ECP agreements for review, digging into the full record to make sure everything was done according to the rules.
So even if something slipped past the CED and the DD, the state office has a chance to catch it. They're looking for any errors, discrepancies, anything that's out of line. It's like an extra safety net.
Exactly. And if they find problems, they can require corrective action, even additional training for the county office staff. It's all about continuous improvement, learning from past mistakes, and making the program better for everyone.
That's a great way to put it. It's not just about catching errors. It's about making the system stronger and more efficient. Now, I know some people might look at all this oversight and think, wow, that's a lot of bureaucracy. Isn't this just making things more complicated?
I understand that concern, but it's important to remember the context. The ECP is dealing with a lot of money, taxpayer dollars, and we want to make sure those dollars are being used responsibly. This level of scrutiny helps ensure that the program is fair, accurate, and accountable.
And that ultimately benefits the farmers, right? Because a more efficient program means they get the help they need faster and with less hassle.
That's the goal. It's about making the process as smooth and effective as possible for the people who need it most.
So it's not about bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake. It's about building a system that works for everyone.
Exactly. And it's a system that could potentially be a model for other government programs as well.
Now that's an interesting thought. We've talked about how this checklist system is designed to improve the ECP. But could it be applied more broadly? Could it help make other government programs more efficient and accountable?
That's a great question, and one that deserves further exploration. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the ECP checklist overhaul.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? I mean, we often hear complaints about government inefficiency, but what if a system like this, with its clear procedures, documentation, and multiple checkpoints could actually help streamline things?
It is a thought-provoking idea. Imagine applying this type of system to healthcare, for example. What if we had clear checklists for processing medical claims, ensuring that payments are accurate and timely, and that patients are getting the coverage they deserve?
Right, or in education. Maybe checklists could be used to track student progress, making sure they're meeting benchmarks and getting the support they need to succeed.
Exactly. And think about infrastructure projects, where delays and cost overruns are all too common. Could a robust checklist system help keep those projects on track and within budget? It's certainly an intriguing possibility.
It feels like this checklist idea could be a game changer in all sorts of areas. It's about bringing a level of rigor and accountability that can sometimes be missing in large, complex systems.
And it's not just about catching errors. It's about building a culture of continuous improvement, where everyone is focused on doing things the right way every time. It's about making those systems work better for everyone involved.
And ultimately, it's about building trust. When people see that systems are in place to ensure fairness and accuracy, they're more likely to have confidence in those systems, whether it's disaster relief, healthcare, or any other essential service.
That's a crucial point. Trust is essential, especially when we're talking about government programs that impact people's lives in such significant ways.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the ECP checklist overhaul, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that this seemingly small change could have a much wider impact. It's a reminder that sometimes the most effective solutions are the ones that focus on clear procedures, thorough documentation, and a commitment to getting things right.
And it's a reminder that even in complex systems, there's always room for improvement. By taking a step back and examining how things work, we can find ways to make them more efficient, more effective, and ultimately more beneficial for everyone involved.
It's all about finding those little levers that can create big positive changes. And who knows, maybe this ECP checklist overhaul is just the beginning. Maybe it's the spark that ignites a movement towards greater transparency and accountability across all levels of government.
That would be a wonderful outcome. It's exciting to think about the potential ripple effects of this seemingly simple change.
So to our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into the information that matters most to you. Maybe this deep dive has inspired you to think differently about the systems we rely on every day, and to consider how even small changes can make a big difference.
Remember, staying informed is the first step towards creating positive change.
And on that note, we'll catch you next time for another deep dive into the world of knowledge and insights. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better tomorrow.